Hum inside my heart a little while. Come closer with the honey of your song. Your dance is a code, is a pathway to what's given. I am learning how to listen.
Hello friends, my name is Danya, and I'm so happy that you chose to be here in this space, so thank you for showing up. Our special guest today is Jana Roemer. Jana grew up immersed in nature and stargazing on an acreage in Saskatchewan, Canada, which has shown to be a valuable foundation for her life as a meditation and yoga nidra guide. For her, spirituality is explicitly linked to our relationship with our miraculous body, majestic Mother Earth, and this mysterious universe. With over 2 decades of study, 15 years of teaching, and many trips around the globe, Jana has synthesized her two great loves, astrology and yoga nidra, to create Astro Nidras and Attune to the Moon. So before we begin, may we all take some time to ground into this space and into ourselves. Let's begin by taking a deep inhale through the nose. And exhale out the mouth. Thank you all so much. Let's begin. There we go. Okay, good morning, Jana, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. What a treat.
I'm really excited to have you on here. And through such a beautiful connection, too, the Earth Daughters Festival is such a potent space. So it's amazing that the circles are widening and bringing us together.
Isn't it true? Yeah.
So to start out a chat, I'd love to hear more about you. What is it that brought you onto this path of wellness, and where are you now?
Well, my journey on this path started over 2 decades ago, and it actually started through philosophy. I was at the University of Saskatchewan, and I took a religious studies class, and I wasn't raised in any kind of religion, more in like a polytheistic, animistic spirituality is what I was raised in. But when I was in that class and learned about the Eastern religions like Buddhism just stole my heart immediately. I was like, what is this thing? This is amazing. It made so much sense to me. And then later on, I got into yoga and meditation and went all in. I traveled the world seeking out different teachers, and spent time in India. And I had job at WestJet for part of my 20s, which allowed me to fly anywhere. WestJet flew for really cheap. And so I did it basically so that I could go study with different teachers. And then, I mean, 20 years as a yoga teacher, I've taught 200 hours, 300 hours, but really I niched down in the last 8 years into yoga nidra. And if you're not familiar with yoga nidra, it's a laying down meditation. So you lay down and you essentially allow your body to fall into the deepest rest state possible while remaining aware to the process. And you go on this really beautiful journey through the subconscious mind. But I mean, along those 20 years, my practice has kickstarted again for so many different reasons. When I was in my Saturn return, I broke my back. And that was a big one. And then a big breakup, of course, drives you into practice. And then motherhood is what shifted me into the practice of yoga nidra, because I was just so tired. And it's so restorative. And right now it's kickstarting my practice again is the death of my mother this summer, and just the enormous amount of grief that I could have never anticipated. And so yeah. And I mean, what I'm learning through my own grieving experience is that like deep, heavy grief could potentially be what saves us as humanity, because it's the most potent experience. And I've had a lot of people die, like all my grandparents, my mom, my dad, and nobody has put me into grief at the same depth as my mother. but it's just like cracked me open into a place of compassion and empathy and love on a level that I've never visited in my life. And I think if more people spent time in this tender space, we wouldn't have the fighting and the warring and the hate and the division and all of it. So that's my present moment. Why do I practice?
Thank you. What a potent reason to stay committed to your practice. And I myself am a yoga teacher and have been practicing for 15 years and teaching for 10. And the one thing that I've really found with my practice, and it sounds like similar to you, is that my practice has evolved throughout my journey, but I know that it's always there and it always meets me exactly where I'm at. And that's why I have practiced for so long, because it is such a dynamic, moving entity that really just supports me in whatever way I need. So thank you so much for the vulnerable share to open us up. And I'm really sorry to hear about your mother. And again, like you said, there's so much depth to grief that people in our modern society just kind of gloss over. It's hard for us to sit there in that darkness, right? And there can be so much depth and so much learning for us if we're open to that process. And I like how you brought that up, that idea of cracking open, and how if we let grief or we let those kind of darker energies into our life, they do that. They shed us, they put us through the fire, they crack us open, they create space, really, right, for something else to be invoked in or invited in. So thank you for sharing where you're at right now. And when you were talking about grief and where the rest of the world is right now, I was going on a deep rabbit hole about nonviolent communication yesterday, actually, and I didn't realize that Marshall Rosenberg, the guy who created it, actually had an infatuation for giraffes. And I see that you have a giraffe behind you right now, and
Yes,
he talks a lot about giraffe language being that language of love, because giraffes have the largest heart out of any animal on earth. Or I think maybe it was land animals. They have the largest heart of land animals. So that I can feel Marshall here with us already, bringing in that love language as we're transitioning through the grief. It sounds like you've been in quite a beautiful path so far, and I find it really common with people who are walking this path that they're called to yoga as kind of that first seed of spirituality, because many of us who grow up in our modern society in the Western world don't have that connection to explain the unexplainable or to feel those esoteric things that are intangible, that we can't talk about. It doesn't fit into our linear mindset, right? And how beautiful that path took you all the way to India, the mother place of yoga. And so I'd love to hear more about your time in India and what that was like for you, and how did that shape your practice now, and the offerings that you bring to the community.
It's really interesting. India for me it kind of destroyed what I thought yoga was. Because everywhere I visited yoga or sacred sites, it had nothing really to do with asana. I practiced the worst asana I've ever practiced in my life in India. But it was devotion, and it was prayer, and it was stillness, and it was connection, and it was ancient, and it was rooted in tradition, and it was a way of life. And there wasn't a separation from heart-based connection. It didn't matter if I was walking into a shop looking at singing bowls or crystals, or walking into an ashram or a temple. Everybody that I connected with, they connected on a more heart-based level. And I think that we're the opposite. We've got great asana, but we have really horrible heart-based connection as a general way of walking our practice into life. We have a lot of people who will, go do, we barely do 90-minute practices in the West anymore, but like go do an hour-long class and then flip somebody off on the road, driving 10 minutes later. And so I think the biggest thing that India gifted me was listening beyond my ears, listening with my whole body. And part of that was not understanding the language and having to work really intuitively. But it also helped me to understand the power of my own frequency or my own energetic embodiment. When I first arrived in India, I was a target. I got off the train and they were like, like all over my situation, trying to sell me things and take me on tours and do all of this stuff. And after about a month being in India, I remember getting off the train in Delhi in one of the most busy train stations. And I was basically invisible, I had gotten to know the place well enough. I mean, I was only there a month, but I had gotten to know it well enough. And I was managing my own energetics in such a way that I was unavailable to be taken advantage of. And the more I was embodied in my desire or embodied in my own wisdom, the more India guided me into the most magical places. I remember sitting at I had gone into this store. This guy that I had met in this yoga training wanted to buy some cigarettes. He wanted to buy some tobacco. And so we went into a store. He's from France and he buys his tobacco and he only has a big bill. And so they didn't have the change in the store. And the girl that was running the counter went off to go get changed. And then another woman came and on our way to do this, he was like, have you ever had your palm read? Have you ever seen a psychic? And he wasn't a spiritual type. He was coming off a lot of drugs and partying and a completely different world. And I was like, yeah, I don't typically seek that out. I wait till it comes to me. And literally the first stop we make is to buy him tobacco. And I'm sitting in this store. And this store, if you've been to India, a lot of times it's not just a convenience store. It's a laundromat and a restaurant and a hostel. And this one happened to be an Ayurvedic doctor. And she looks at my hand and she was like, oh, you need to talk to my uncle. And they wouldn't give my friend his change back until the uncle was able to come speak to me. And he went into my hand and he just started to speak to my life in ways that I was left in tears. He was so incredibly accurate. And he invited me to come back and sit in his practice. He's like, you need to be learning Ayurveda. You need to be working with people. You need to be working with astrology. And at that time, I was like, there's no way. My trip was not bringing me back to the area of India at all. And within 2 weeks, I had completely recalibrated my journey to come back and basically apprentice with him in his practice for a few days. And it was, one of those really magical experiences. And I remember my friend, he looked at me and he's like, didn't you just say you typically wait for it to come to you? And I was like, yeah. And I turned that switch on inside of me. And then there it was, so it's and I think that's a lesson for life. The more we embody who we really are and our values and our desires and our contribution and are aligned with our dharma and our purpose in this life, the more the universe and the people that you meet and the situations that you come across, just it all, it conspires to lead you deeper into who you really are. So.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was beautiful. As you were talking about India, I just imagined being in that Ayurvedic convenience store with you. I also was in India. That's where I studied yoga many years ago as well. And yeah, one thing that I really loved about that space is exactly what you're talking about, is that the people there, many of the people there, because I, can't say everybody, but many of the people that I met that are there embody their truth. It is a way of life. It is not like yoga is separate. It's not like prayer is separate, devotion isn't separate. It's how they go through their daily interactions. And from that space of being so connected to your truth and your purpose and why you're in this space and in this world, I found people didn't apologize for being themselves. They just really stood in their power. And this came from, the simple things like walking across the bridge in Rishikesh, the old lady is not going to stop and wait for you and apologize if she gets in your way. She's going because she knows the direction that she needs to be in, right? And that was so potent in those lessons for me of how to step into my truth and to embody the path that I really want to be walking. And like you said, when we step into that space, you're putting out this like energetic frequency that then attracts those instances to you, right? When you are not wrapped up in the illusion or the Maya, right? You're able to realize what's actually there. And I think that that's the thing, is that it's there all the time. It's just whether you're willing to listen to it or to see it. So thank you so much for sharing that experience, and how potent that you got to go and practice Ayurveda for 5 days in India.
Yeah, it wasn't really. It was just, sitting witness to him. And he was more in the astrology. And I mean, I was in India in 2011, and in 2016, I officially started my astrology practice. But it wasn't like, that wasn't where I was headed at that time. So, yeah.
And so what kind of astrology do you practice? Do you practice Jyotish, or is there a certain lineage that you have been called to?
No, I practice Western astrology, but I also refer to where the planets actually are in the sky. But publicly, it's all Western. When I started to dive in to learn, I found just learning Western astrology to be way more accessible. It's what I had access to for teachers at the time. It's like, 2014 when I started studying. Actually, I've been always interested in astrology. I just never thought it would be a career. When the internet first started, the very first thing I ever bought on the internet was my own natal chart reading. And I think, when I was studying, there were a few online courses, but it wasn't like today. Like today, you can find anything you want online. Then I had to really actually find a teacher. So Western was the way it goes. And I mean, every different kind of astrology, it's still working with the same timing. Like the planets are always still square or conjunct or opposite. That doesn't change. But the rules change of how you interpret it. So same, but different.
Amazing. So you're saying that you offer Western astrology as now part of your practice. So in what ways do you offer that for people? Do you do natal chart readings?
I used to do natal chart readings. I don't do them so much anymore, just because time. I'm not that interested in exchanging hours for dollars. That's not really where my mindset is as far as my earning potential goes. But like I mentioned before, I really niched down to Yoga Nidra. And I started realizing when I was practicing Yoga Nidra, I was also blogging about the moon, about the new moons and the full moons. And I noticed that my journaling after a practice was completely aligned with the astrology when I would go to look at what's happening in the stars. And I was like, wow, this is really connecting me to these greater cycles. And then I decided, I just was like, well, what would happen if I guided the practice in alignment with the astrology? And I was teaching at that time, I was living in Venice Beach, California, at a yoga studio called Love Yoga Space. And I didn't really, I had been actually fired, not fired, but like let go from another studio for always integrating astrology into my classes. It was more of like a power vinyasa, like lots of surf dudes. The owner was a guy, and he was like, I don't think the surf dudes care about astrology. I'm like, well, you'd be surprised. But then, so at Love, they brought me in and they were like, do whatever you want. And I was mixing the astrology into the Yoga Nidra practice and also my yoga classes. And the students were always like, how do you know? Like, are you in my emails? Are you in my texts? Like, how do you know what's going on with me in my life? And I was like, it's astrology. It connects us all. It's the great unifier. We have so many things taking us into division that this is a unifier. And so then one of the women who was coming to my classes all the time, she was like, you should record these practices and put them on the internet. And I was like, oh, nobody's going to care. And she's like, you'd be surprised. And it was before everything was streamed and everything was online. And I decided that I would record one. I had no idea what I was doing. I used like GarageBand on my Apple computer and like Googled how to do it. And I put my first one out thinking nobody would care, and it was like a hit. Like, it was amazing. And so then I started to create those consistently. So instead of working with like individual charts, I feel that astrology is sometimes misleading. Sometimes people adopt what a reader says as truth and overrides their intuition. And so by actually guiding a practice that takes you into the body and points your lens inward and has the inquiry going inside, and then the answers coming from within, well, attuning people to the like using astrology for that attunement to attune us to a greater existence, like the solar system and beyond, then people can self-define what the astrology is meaning for them. Do you get what I'm saying? So I'm not the interpreter necessarily. I'm the pointer. I'm like, hey, why don't you feel this? Why don't you ask this question? Why don't you connect with this theme? And then see what arises from within. I don't think there's any more potent way for me to be guiding anybody in the world right now than to point them inside and to enhance their own intuition. So that's the primary way that I work with astrology. I mean, I have an Instagram account called Attune to the Moon that we put out, I do, astro updates and little horoscopes, like when Venus moves into Libra, there's little horoscopes for that, or but for the most part, my passion lies in getting people connected with themselves. And when I do readings, because I do them from time to time, mostly for friends, or sometimes I'll like trade, readings with other people. My aim with it is to really ground people in who they are, and not to create more questions, but to create validation and to affirm alignment, because we have so many things in the world telling us that we're not, or that we can't, or that we're wrong, or that we're bad, or that we should be doing something else than we are today. And I think that the biggest fear that a lot of people have is actually showing who they truly are. So if I can use astrology as a point of validation for who you really are, then I feel like that's a win as well. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, these practices like astrology, or even like the doshas, these types of practices that kind of categorize people. They do, that's the profoundness of them, is that they help us to realize the potential that we have, right? Because we do live in this society, and I find this is that I've been doing a lot of work with women, so I see this a lot with women, but I understand that it's also there for men, where we're in this modern society where we're constantly comparing ourselves and realizing or thinking that, we can't, or we can't ever be, our fullest potential. And I heard this beautiful quote the other day. Can't remember who said it now off the top of my head, but she said that people are not scared of their limiting beliefs. They're scared of their potential. They're scared to step into their power. And so thank you for doing that work, and aligning and affirming people about the truth of who they are and their purpose for being here, and doing it in such a beautiful way. Because one thing that I've found through my path is that you really can't help people unless they want to be helped. And in that way, for them to like find that wisdom within themselves and to feel that within themselves, there's nothing more powerful than that, right? For them to know that they have that already, that it's not something external of them that can be given or taken away, but that it's always there.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And I also think that it's so important for people to rest right now, like we're living at a time of some of the greatest collective trauma and grief ever. And we've been trained through social media to not look away and to speak up and to get involved. And I actually think the opposite. I think that we shouldn't look away. I think that we should be aware of what's going on. Don't get me wrong on that part. But I think it is vital that we take breaks from it, because before the advent of the internet, you think in World War II, everybody was constantly sitting, like, sure they were, but at a completely different pace. Like a letter would have to be brought across the ocean back home. Like it wasn't like we were sitting watching screens and having these 15-minute sound bites constantly. And never mind just how traumatic social media is for our mental health without having the travesty of the world happening right now. And so, like social media is rewiring our brain to not be able to hold a thought or to not be able to hold attention. And so if we are following that guidance of like staying informed and staying involved and speaking up on absolutely everything, what that's training us to do is shorten our attention span, drive us into deeper trauma, and divide people in order to ultimately be conquered. And so I really think that we need deep rest. We need to practice sustained awareness, and we need to stay in our hearts and in our compassion as much as possible. And so, like, astrology aside, just from the perspective of like our nervous system and our mental health and our family health, like our relational health, our familial health, it's so important that we rest. It's so important that we like tune into our intuition, that we tune into the message inside, to the source within ourselves, like above and beyond absolutely everything else. That's, to me, the most primary importance. I mean, even if in a place where, and my privilege is obviously showing, I'm not denying that, that like my privilege is showing, but even in my most traumatic times in my life, not that it compares to war at all, the most important thing in that moment is that connection with self, right? Like that connection with self and that connection with purpose. And so, yeah, I think that's the most primary contribution I can make to the world right now, is like reminding people that going inward and finding that peace and quiet inside is paramount to your overall health.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much. As I shared earlier, through being a yoga teacher, I've been provided an opportunity to really dive deep into anatomy in the realm of yoga. Obviously, I'm definitely not an anatomy professional in any way, shape, or form. But one thing that when I was diving deep into the nervous system that really blew my mind was the parasympathetic nervous system and that action of rest and digest, right? That's usually what we combine it with. And I always assumed that, yes, when we go to sleep, we're digesting our food, right? And that's where my understanding kind of peaked in that linear expression of it. But then I started to also understand that we're also digesting our thoughts, we're digesting our emotions, we're digesting all of the sensory inputs and outputs that we go through an entire day. And so, as you said, in this modern society where we have social media in front of us and we're constantly intaking, we need to have that time to digest, especially when it is these massive world issues, like what we're experiencing right now, right? If we don't take that time to actually step back and really allow ourselves to process, then we're always going to be in that state of defensive or offensive, I think, and not in that state of equanimity where we can meet each other in love and compassion and empathy. And what I've really seen this kind of uh, transpire as in our society is this calling out culture. And I know that might not be a very well loved or well taken thing to bring up on this podcast, but I have seen that it's very common, right, where we take this opportunity to call out one each other, to cancel one each other, to unblock or to block or to unfriend, or to make these posts really publicly stating things about people that we don't really understand, right? And that calling out and cancel culture, it is very toxic. And again, this idea of like the nonviolent communication keeps coming up. Like, how can we meet each other in the space of the giraffe language? How can we meet each other in the space of actually showing love and empathy for one another? And like you said, it starts by going inwards. And I think the thing that I've really noticed in this path as well is that when people go inwards, there's a lot of fear there. because they're holding on to a lot in their bodies and they might not be ready to face that. And so this space of teaching yoga or teaching yoga nidra, right? That's where people are offered these opportunities to go inward, to face what's in there, to digest what they've been holding on to, in a space where they feel safe and comfortable, hopefully, depending on the teacher, right?
Yeah. Well, and like you said about going in the fear, a lot of it comes from cognitive dissonance as well. Like cognitive dissonance is like the way that I like to think of cognitive dissonance is deep inside, you actually know that what's happening out here is a lie, right? Like it's a facade. And the cognitive dissonance is that you'd rather believe the safety of the lie. You'd rather stay in the safety of belonging. You'd rather sacrifice your own values or your own inner knowing in order to stay safe with our primal psychological need of belonging. Because, you know, our primal brain says, well, if I'm outside of the tribe in tribal days, outside of the tribe, I'm dead. And so there's such a massive betrayal of self that happens when we don't take the time to go inwards, and then to be able to build up the courage and the confidence and the stability within self in order to push back from the tribe. And like that cancel culture, since we kind of went down this road, the problem with like blocking and deleting and making statements is that the algorithm is paying attention, and then you're getting more of that one thing, and it's creating mental health issues that we're going to have to write about. Right? And it's preventing people from actually seeing the bigger picture, or from seeing the propaganda, or from seeing the twist in the narrative that is keeping us divided. We're living in a really kind of, in many ways, like a dangerous time for everybody, not just the people in physically dangerous spaces, right? Like we're living in landmines, mental landmines everywhere. And so, yeah, getting people to go inward is not easy. Like getting people to sit down for meditation or a yoga nidra practice, or even just to close your eyes and appreciate 3 breaths, is a lot for some people to handle. But I think it's really important. But you said it already. You said we can't force healing. We can't force the hand of healing on somebody else. Everybody only comes at their own time. So it's part of the reason I like using astrology, because people are like, I love astrology. That's me to know about me. And then I'm like, haha, come to my new moon circle. Okay, come to my new moon circle. And all of a sudden they're laying down in yoga nidra practice and they're like, what just happened to me? Like, that was amazing, but whoa, I would have never done that. You know, I go to Burning Man every year, and I always guide yoga nidra there. And I get a whole bunch of like people who have never done that laying down for yoga nidra for the first time, especially in those settings. And it's mind-blowing what people come back with. They're like, I would have never chosen that, but that was the best thing that ever happened to me. You know, like, wow. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful reconnection with self.
It can be so enlightening for people that have, because a lot of people I find that come to these sessions maybe have never meditated at all in their life. And then all of a sudden they're laying down and practicing this ancient practice for 30 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes, maybe sometimes, you know. And same, I've offered yoga nidra at Shambhala, and like in those spaces where you have hundreds of people sitting down and practicing with you. And yeah, the profoundness of seeing those faces afterwards, and they're just like, what did I just go through, right? Especially they're already in this space where there's so much divine chaos that they're already trying to figure out what's happening, and then also these portals that we create for them to go inward, and they're just flabbergasted. It's a beautiful practice. So I would love to hear more about your practice and your offering of yoga nidra, and how you offer it, and how you weave astrology through it, and what that looks like for you these days. Are you still just doing on the lunar cycles, or how does that show up in our community?
I do everything online right now. Just really loving being location independent. And because I've moved around quite a bit, I'm a Saskatchewan girl originally, spent some time in Alberta, a little bit of time on the coast, not like living, but like a lot of time there, and then lived down in Southern California for 7 years. My people are kind of everywhere, and so online it's my favorite. I love it. I was online before the pandemic. It was awesome when the pandemic happened for me. When it happened for me, when the pandemic happened, I was like, come, I've got a space for you. It was really amazing to be able to have that influx of people coming to practice online. I would like to get into more in person, but primarily right now I host a virtual new moon circle every month. And the structure is, a drop in, kind of ritual ceremony. And then I teach about the astrology and do some journaling. And then before we do our intentions, we lay down for an Astro Nidra. And it's always based off of, whatever's going on with that new moon. My practice includes medical astrology, as well as, archetypal astrology. And I'm also really into the sacred geometry of astrology and how we can find that in the body. Another one of my really big influences is Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen of the Body Mind Centering school. Tar Judal has been a big influence in my life, as well as a woman named Sadie Adams, who both Tar and Sadie are students of Bonnie's. And she does really subtle body embodiment work. And so just the way that I guide Yoga Nidra, I've been criticized by traditionalists because I break the rules. I follow the koshas, which is very traditional. But my main goal is first to create coherence in the nervous system, and then to journey in, in a really subtle, beautiful way. So if you find my earlier practices, I'm following, the body scans that we're all taught when we learn Yoga Nidra. But if you come into my more recent work, it's a lot different because I'll work with subtle anatomy, everything from the sacred geometry in the body to meridian lines to, pranic flows, vayus, like everything. And my practice is always evolving. So I can't really say exactly what you would get because it's always inspired by those big gods up in the sky.
They are a beautiful realm for inspiration, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then I have a membership site where they're all stored. And when I built the website, it's a custom build that was not built on the clock or the Gregorian calendar. It's built off the cosmic clock. So I have the NASA data filled into the back end, like with the ephemeris. And when you log into the website, you only see practices that are relevant for today's astrology. And so you get a little astro update, and then it's like, what do you want to attune to? The sun, the moon? Do you want to attune to Mercury or Mars? Or I'm going to start building out the Venus practices. And then other than that, I mostly do festivals, festival teaching. I love it. I love festival teaching. It's my favorite. You've done it. People are just so available emotionally. They're there for an adventure. I often call my classes something like the Psychonaut Dreams. I'm really open to plant medicine and different psychoactive materials. I think it's all medicine. And I run retreats where I actually work with a woman who serves bufo. And so we use Yoga Nidra to prepare the body and to integrate, and everybody has their individual bufo ceremony with her. I just think that when we're looking at shifting consciousness, these are some of the most beautiful gifts from source, from creator. They get us there if used responsibly in the right set and setting. And that's like festivals, the most feedback. I remember I used to teach at Lightning in a Bottle and Organ Eclipse Fest, and the emails that I get afterwards are usually from people who are like on LSD or on mushrooms or something like this, or MDMA, and they'd never experienced the practice before in their life, and they'd never experienced a psychedelic with that much intimacy and clarity, and the insights and the reconnection with self and the healing that they receive through those practices. Like, I have a folder in my inbox where I'm just saving emails from people that have those experiences. I think that it's, I hope that's okay that I talk about this on here, but I just think it's so beautiful. I mean, it's not like I'm using those medicines on a daily basis, but meeting people where they are and like sneaking them into a practice that changes their life, and then also for people, I remember at Burning Man, I had somebody come up to me afterwards and said they were having a really hard time integrating their experience with different medicines. And the Yoga Nidra was an opportunity for them to actually reconnect with themselves and get out of the chaos that the different substances that they had been taking caused within their system. And so I think they're a really beautiful pairing. And again, see, there's another point of criticism that I'll receive from the traditionalists, like, why would you ever mix those two? But I think it's okay.
Yeah, I truly believe in the power of plant medicine, and it is such a beautiful gift, as you said, when used in the proper or
responsibly set and setting.
Yeah, definitely. It needs to be done in the right way, right?
Yeah.
Again, in this lineage of spirituality, you meet certain people along the way, that are called to plant medicine, and you see that they're doing the work, but there's that integration side that's kind of overlooked. And so how beautiful is that, weaving that with Yoga Nidra, because as we talked about the PNS, that's what Yoga Nidra is offering, is that time to rest and digest. And so this is that ability to integrate. And I find that that's exactly why people love mixing psychedelics or plant medicine with these ancient practices, is because it finally gives them the opportunity to really notice what happens or what is activated when they invoke those energies in themselves. And I think there's a reason why a lot of this plant medicine is finally coming to Western medicine, right? Like we see many, we were just talking about how we're both based here in the West Kootenays outside Nelson. And in Nelson in particular, there's many people who are psychotherapists that are now offering MDA research, MDMA, ketamine, all that kind of stuff, where they're offering people to engage with these medicines in a space that's safe, that they have people watching out for them. And the profound benefits that these people are receiving from that, people who have PTSD or depression or anxiety. And I myself am someone who has experienced depression many times through my life and been in that deep dark hole, and mushrooms have pulled me out of it more than once. So I definitely have a deep respect for a lot of these medicines, and I'm really happy to hear that you were able to be in that space as well of helping people to integrate through, because I find that that's the one part that's so highly overlooked. As many people go to these plant medicine ceremonies and then they're just off on their own. It's like a little baby bird getting kicked out of the nest, and
I know.
like, how do I use
now
these
what?
Yeah.
Wow, I just met God, and what do I do with this? Like, was that even real? I think that's the biggest thing that happens for people, is they're like, was that even real? And they start to doubt their own experience. But when you have integration, when you have proper integration, it's like, no, this is actually a part of me. Like I just got to meet a deeper part of me, but the integration is key. And don't you think that, like, when the medicines were originally found, back in the day when we would go see a medicine man or a woman, my lineages saw me, and it was all drumming, and so it was drumming, it was ceremony, it was prayer, it was, and like the work that they've done now to study just what a steady drum beat does. Like all indigenous cultures have drums, right? And it takes you into a trance-like state. And so I think that the separation actually of those medicines from ceremony is the biggest issue that we have. And like to reintegrate ceremony, ceremony with the practices, the embodiment practices of ceremony. Even somebody who has no desire to meditate or do yoga nidra or whatever, back in the day, I mean, I used to sit with these women, the 13 indigenous grandmothers. And there's one woman who I didn't get a chance to sit with in ceremony before she passed, but she was from Gabon in Africa. And when you would go to her healing center, there was no guarantee how she was going to serve you. Like it was always here's this big, huge repertoire of things that I have in my toolkit that I like, these ancient practices that I can employ to help you. But it wasn't like one size fits all. It was all intuitive. It was done in ceremony. It was done with embodiment. It was done with, nervous system regulation, with ancestors. It's just, we're so funny. We're so extractive. And I think to reintegrate, even though what I'm doing is nothing compared to what they're doing, it's at least coming back into a more sacred space with it.
Yeah, I disagree with you. I think that what you're doing is very similar in an aspect because you are a woman who is sitting in this space of space holding, right? And even though maybe it doesn't feel exactly ceremonial, it is still a ceremony in that sense, right? And for me, like, yeah, sitting in ceremony is beautiful. And there's these practices, as you said, when we look at our actual heritage, that's where my life has been recently, is I've been really diving deep into my heritage, like my lineage, both on my mother and father's side. So my mother, her lineage is from Ukraine, and my dad's lineage is from Croatia. And so I've been diving deep into the Slavic culture and looking at what actually did my ancestors practice. But, through my travels around the globe, I've noticed that there are these aspects that are common threads throughout, no matter where your ancestors are from. Drumming is one of them. Plant medicine is one of them, in whatever aspect that might be. And mushrooms is usually the thread. But there are these aspects that are always brought into it. And the other one is like tuning into the cycles of the earth, and therefore like the cycles of ourselves, right? And so it sounds like that you're hitting all those points of tuning into the cycles of the cosmos and tuning into the cycles of people, and using that that natural world for people to facilitate their inward journey.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying that I'm not, but I'm not compared to my ancestors. My ancestors weren't sitting on social media. My ancestors weren't, watching TV or, and like somebody who was a medicine woman or a medicine man back when we were tribal nomadic people, or at least that's what my ancestors are. It was a very different life. So I don't want to suggest that I'm I'm doing that. That's where I'm saying I'm not, but I'm at least working towards bringing a greater integration. And yes, absolutely. Like all of everything, everything I can, I'm learning. I'm a student of, for sure.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because that is something that is very common these days, right? If someone walks up to me and they're like, I'm a medicine man, I'm like, red flag.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go in the opposite direction.
No, yeah.
But there is,
and when I was speaking about the extractive nature, it's more like when these medicines get used as like a party drug with zero reverence or zero respect, like zero, it's different. It's very different than, and even the way that we in the West are creating like synthetic version of, like, I'm like, what? No, I don't want a synthetic version of. I want God's creation. I want source creation. I want like, this is the hard like pause for me if it's synthetically created. But, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And there's like, I was just in my last podcast, I was talking to this woman about this as well. This idea of this like linear world that we're in right now, and this heavy emphasis on the divine masculine. And I think a lot of what you're talking about is bringing back in that divine feminine, right? Like going back to the natural medicines that are provided to us by Mother Earth. And also when you were talking about these grandmothers that you sat with, I think that was a very common occurrence back in the day of our ancestors, was that it was women who were sitting in these seats of space holding for medicine journeys because of our intuitive power, because we're able to actually come into the moment, ground into the moment, root into the present now, and feel what is needed. And that is a very intuitive practice that there are men who can tap into that too. But in particular, women, we've been kind of forced out into that realm of like trusting our inner wisdom. And so how potent is that you got to experience that journey with those women? And that's what I was bringing up earlier as well, that you are stepping into that role as a woman, as a space holder, and using your intuition as well to offer that guidance.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I have one more question before we tune out here. Just for our listeners that have absolutely no idea what Yoga Nidra is, would you be willing to explain in a nutshell what the practice entails?
Sure. It's really difficult to explain what a strawberry tastes like until you bite into the strawberry, right? And so what you're asking me to do is kind of challenging, but I like speaking in metaphor and in context that people can relate to. So if meditation was masculine, Yoga Nidra would be feminine. You know, meditation, we're like sitting upright and we're attempting to control the mind and the breath. In Yoga Nidra, we're vertical, horizontal, and there's no attempt to control. It's to allow everything in and to observe. And the practice is actually non-logical in nature as the practitioner, but as the guide, it's really important to be well trained in guidance or to find somebody who's well trained to guide, because we're taking people into such an intimate space. And what the practice is as an experience is you lay down, and you close your eyes and you're following the guidance of whoever's leading you and systematically moving through the layers. We call them the koshas in yogic talk, but the koshas are essentially like you have a food body, this body that is of matter. And then there's another layer, which is like the energetic body. And then there's another layer that is like the mind and the emotions. And then there's another layer that is the knowing and the intuition. And then there's another layer that is bliss. And then I also like to speak of another layer that is ego, the ego that keeps us separated. But essentially what we're doing within the practice is we're moving into a completely surrendered state that comes about through a coherent nervous system. So a nervous system that is no longer pointing outward. If you're familiar with you would be, but listeners, if you're familiar with the 8 limbs of yoga, when you get to, most people know about asana, but there's actually 8 kind of limbs to yoga. And the 5th limb is pratyahara. And pratyahara is when you invert the senses. And so rather than your senses being in the world, so I see the trees outside my window, I can smell the bone broth on the stove, I can hear your voice, all this external stuff. My senses go inward and I start to track sensation, sound, taste, audio from inside. And once you invert your senses, once you're actually in that pratyahara, one of the misconceptions of pratyahara is that it's the withdrawing of the senses and people stop there. But it's the withdrawing of the senses and the awakening of the senses inside. It's the practice or the experience of understanding and experiencing the universe within you, right? And so in the practice of Yoga Nidra, pratyahara is activated. And then the nervous system comes into a state of coherence where you have this kind of global, universal experience with yourself, your body, and then those layers that I just spoke of. And then we bring them all into alignment with each other. So there's no separation between all of those layers. And when that happens and the ego actually dies, the absolute highest expression of coherence is then one with source. And so that's like a big kind of concept for people to try and wrap their brain around. In the practice, you're tracking sensation in your hands and your feet and your collarbones and your face, like in a ordered fashion. That's most times we work in a way that is tracking gray matter in the brain in an organized fashion as well. At least people who are guiding it intelligently are working in that way. We work with opposites a lot of the time. So in today's world where everything is so polarized, it's like, well, it's either right or it's wrong, but it's not, it's both, right? Depending on your perspective. And so the way that I guide, at least anyways, I work a lot with opposites to help people to know that like grief is love. And we understand the night because of the day. We understand pleasure because of pain. And they're not exclusive of each other. They actually are both inside of each other. And when we can start to understand that with concepts like love and grief, or resentment and forgiveness, or frustration and calmness, like they're all, the opposites have to be actual opposites, like on a polarity spectrum. It will create shortcuts in your neuroplasticity, like in your neuro design, your neuroarchitecture, that when you find yourself outside of the practice, let's say you are finding yourself in a pattern of frustration, to be frustrated easily, but you want to actually be in forgiveness. If your frustration, let's say, is caused by a person that you love and you don't want to be frustrated with, you can actually train yourself to create these little bridges within the way that energy is firing in your brain, so that you're forgiving faster than you're frustrated, or you're recognizing the love faster than you're getting lost in your grief and sadness. Like right at the beginning, you talked about grief being a dark space, and that's not my experience with grief at all. My experience with grief is the most tender, loving, wise space I've ever encountered. Compassionate, empathetic space. And yeah, there's a lot of sadness, but I don't view it as dark. Or as dark and like it's something to be avoided. I'm in full embrace of it, and I give credit to my yoga nidra practice for that, because losing my mom deserves my sadness. And in that sadness, I'm connecting with her, and her tears are like a physical embodiment of her when I can't actually see her anymore. She's working through me, and we only grieve because we love. And so that practice of really understanding and embracing opposites, but embodied opposites, I think this is one of the greatest benefits of the practice. We're also working with, I like to call them all the clairs. So most people have heard of clairvoyance, but who's heard of clairgustation or clairaudience or clairsentience, right? And so every sense that we have that's external, there's a sense that's internal. And so the practice is profound at helping people to connect with their own intuitive and psychic nature. And we all are intuitive and we all are psychic. It's just, have we had a listening practice in order to be able to hear it? And so it's a listening practice. If I wanted to break it down to a sentence, I would say that yoga nidra is a listening practice, but it's not listening out there. It's listening in here, inside. And then there's, options like using what we call sankalpa, which is a vow or a statement that you want to reprogram in your psyche, in your subconscious mind. Everybody has, things that we love about ourselves and things that we don't necessarily love about ourselves. We all have our own relationship with path and purpose. And so sankalpa can be used in so many different ways. Like if I wanted to rewire my lack of self-worth into a sense of worthiness or trust in self, I can use sankalpa to do that. And so use a statement within the practice, because you're moving through your subconscious mind to a place where it's really easy to reprogram your mind. That's why having a responsible, well-trained guide is so important, because you're going into such a vulnerable space. But once you're in there, if I have a statement like I am valuable, right? And when I'm feeling like I'm not, but I'm in a state where I can rewire my subconscious mind very quickly, and I'm in that state and I repeat to myself, I am valuable, it changes the configuration of how my subconscious mind sources information in any moment. And so instead of, standing up in front of 300 people and then going home and criticizing everything I did for the last hour, I can stand up in front of 300 people and see the value in what I just offered. Like that's a profound difference of experience. And it can also just be something as simple as mom guilt, right? And just trusting yourself as a mother, or in partnership, or whatever. The sky is the limit. There's no limit. It's so personal because you design it yourself. It's not like a hypnosis where somebody's putting it in you. There's a space for you to have your own say in the process. So I don't know if that answers what yoga nidra is. It kind of does, but it's a bit roundabout.
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much. I highly agree with you that I love that yoga nidra is a practice of listening to oneself, and how you just finished that off well as well. Like I kind of tie that in together as like that practice of listening to the space that's in oneself, right? And that's what those emotions or those things that carry that quality of darkness, that like tamasic energy, it's all needed, right? That darkness, that lethargy, that rest and digest, we need all of that. And there is a magic that's to it, right? That creating space holds for us. That's what we're doing, is we're creating space for other things to come in, whether that be more light or whatever that is. And um there's actually I have a son as well. I don't know if I said this already. He's 4 and he really loves anime. And we were watching this anime the other day, and the the little boy on it said that how can we hold grief and love in our heart at the same time? Because we will never get over those wounds. We won't ever be able to forget them. But how can we expand our heart's capacity to hold both of them at the same time, at the same level, and the same understanding that they're both necessary, right? And so yeah, so thank you for sharing that, and for bringing up Sankalpa as well, because I find that what Sankalpa does for me and for my practice, and the reason why I offer it to students, is it gives you an orientation. And especially when you're in that space of darkness, it's hard to know which way to go. It's dark. It's like when, like, I live out in the valley, as we were talking about before, and when it's nighttime out here, it's dark. There's no street lights, there's nothing. And, I now have some salt crystal lamps in my living room, because when I got up in the middle of the night to let the cat out or let the dog back in, I would bump into the table or accidentally touch the wood stove or something, right? And so having that Sankalpa, I feel, does bring in that a little bit more orientation. It's like my Sankalpa in physical form right now is my salt crystal lamp. And so so thank you for bringing up those aspects, and I love your understanding and your explanation of Yoga Nidra and the Yoga Nidra practice. And I'm thrilled to do one of your practices now. As soon as we get off of this, I'm gonna look it up and sit down for a few minutes before my son gets home.
Nice. Yeah, it's fun. I love it. As soon as I was a daily meditator for almost a decade. And once I got into Yoga Nidra, I was like, what was I doing meditating? Like, meditation is great, don't get me wrong, but like Yoga Nidra is just so loving. It's like the mother comes and holds you. It's so gentle and soft, and you don't have to worry about your body aching. The biggest risk to Yoga Nidra is that you're going to fall asleep instead of remain aware for the practice. And one of the other things that like really piqued my interest about Yoga Nidra was actually Buddhism. I spent a bit of time when I was in India, I didn't mention this part, but up in Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives. And this idea that people die and remember themselves through the bardo and remember themselves in their next life has always been really fascinating to me. And when I first came across those teachings, I actually used to go sit with Ram Dass in Maui, and he spoke of Aldous Huxley and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He actually narrates a Canadian broadcasting documentary on the Tibetan Book of the Dead with Leonard Cohen. But when I first came across those teachings, I was like, this is the most important information that human beings can have in this life, is like how to die consciously, which ultimately means how to live really well. And like live with intention and live awake, and then to remain aware through transition. And the Tibetans, they have 4 styles of meditation. They have seated, they have laying down, they have standing, and they have walking. And the laying down meditation is paramount to dying consciously and remembering who you are in the bardo. And I didn't clue into that immediately when I started Yoga Nidra, because my practice was, I was a new mom and I was just so tired that I could barely sit for a meditation anymore. I was like, but I could do Yoga Nidra. But when I put it together, I was like, oh, this is so badass. Like, this practice is like, it's really badass. And then you start to think of all the little metaphors of death in your life, like the death of a relationship or a job, or we all kind of experience the death of a culture like pre-COVID to, like there's so much death in the world, both, physical death, but like all the metaphorical deaths that we experience every single day. Every exhale is a death. Like it's all there. And to be able to go through transition, most people lose consciousness or lose awareness or lose center in transition, right? Like think about, as a mom, how easy it is to shout at your kid when they're like taking 10 years to put on their boots and you're late for the thing. It's just happens. And it's transition points where we lose center. And what Yoga Nidra teaches us is to be able to stay aware no matter what state you're in. So I can be angry, but I can be aware in my anger, and I can be pointed and directed with my anger. I can be careful with where I'm spewing my anger. It never makes anger wrong. And I think that for me, and I know that this is incorrect, so I'm just outing myself on incorrect understanding. I was a long time Vipassana meditator, and equanimity was so celebrated that I started to believe that my lack of undulation in emotion was spiritual superiority. And Yoga Nidra teaches me that actually it's our emotional experience that makes us human and gives us depth and creates connection. And it doesn't demonize any emotion, whether it's rage or the purest compassion. It doesn't demonize it. It all has purpose. It all has reason. It all has a job to do. And we wouldn't be given anger as our design if we weren't meant to experience it. And that permission to feel and to have the awareness through the feelings has been one of the greatest gifts that I've received from the practice. Is just my emotional range is so huge. It's so huge. Where Vipassana meditation, it was shrinking. So everybody likes to, all the Vipassana meditators are like, but you don't understand. And I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. But I'm just saying that was the experience that I had with it. And I think it's not uncommon. I watch people in their spiritual superiority and I'm just like, yeah, but aren't you human? Like, can't you feel that? Like, are you not upset? People are like, why are you crying about what's happening over in Israel and Gaza? And I'm like, how could you not feel? How could you not feel this? I don't need to be there. It doesn't need to be my brother or my cousin, but I can cry for these people. And I can cry for these people knowing that my tears are temporary. And I'm allowing myself to heal in the moment by expressing. I'm allowing myself to change course in a way that is necessary by feeling it. I'm allowing myself to receive the wisdom of life by feeling it fully. I could go on about that forever.
Well, thank you. I've been absolutely loving your shares. And yeah, with just your last note there about this ability to cry or to feel for other people. In the line of energy work, one thing that I've recognized is as I'm offering for people or working with them and those emotions come through, how much of a gift, how much of a blessing it is that those people trust me enough to allow me to release that energy for them, right? And I think that that's what I've been noticing with this collective consciousness and with what's going on in the world right now, because there's so many places that are in pain. And many people that I talk to that are empaths or a little bit more energetically aware, they're having a difficult time right now. And I think it's because we are taking on that role for the collective to move that energy through and to release it. So thank you for doing that. And the other thing that came up when you were sharing as well with this with Yoga Nidra and that aspect of the motherly love and then Tibetan Buddhism. I love Tibetan Buddhism. It's such a beautiful practice, that a whole life dedicated to dying gracefully and consciously, right? And dedicating your entire life to that moment. And something that came to mind is the marriage between Shiva and Durga, right? And Shiva being this deity of death and destruction, but also that ability to be rebirthed, and Durga being his consort, and she is looked at as the mother of all, right? And so that aspect just came through when you were talking about Yoga Nidra, about how we're kind of sitting in that space of Shiva, that darkness and that ability to let go, but who's there holding us the entire time. It's Durga, it's the mother, and providing, she's holding us and providing space for us to find that love within as well. So thank you so much for all your shares. It's been so lovely listening to all of your wisdom, and I super appreciate everything that you brought to this chat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and all your wisdom as well. It was fun riffing with you.
It may have been a reason why I decided to start this podcast, is I love nerding out about this stuff. So.
Right? Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jana, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Maybe we'll run into each other somewhere in the Kootenays.
Thank you, everybody, so much for listening to today's episode. What a beautiful chat that was with Jana. And it was so amazing to share space with her through this platform. If you'd like to continue staying connected with Jana, you can find her at her website, janaroemer.com. That's JANAROEMER.com. She is committed to the ongoing release of Astro Nidras through www.attunetothemoon.com. You can also find her on Insight Timer in their courses section, as well as in their free library. The offerings she once held have all moved online, so stay connected with her through her websites or through her Instagram to keep practicing with this beautiful woman. My name is Danya Buak. I am the lead facilitator and founder of Wild Song Yoga School. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for stepping into this space of learning and growing with these potent wisdom keepers. It is a deep honor and a deep blessing to be here curating and magically weaving all of this knowledge for you. So thank you so much. From my heart to each and every one of yours, namaste.